Hi there, thanks for tuning in. A few years ago, we released an album called Willpower. It came out in 2023, mid-April, which was just under 3 months after my father passed away. It's a very special album to me. It took a lot out of me, but it also filled me in ways that, only those special projects can do. And so as sort of a 2-year anniversary celebration, I suppose, I wanted to read a document that I wrote that was, holy shit.
Oh no.
I don't even know how many pages this is. But when the album first released, actually, and this still is the case, if you buy the album online, you get a virtual booklet. And in that virtual booklet is a QR code. And if you scan that QR code, you get led to a Google document, assuming that it's still online. But if that document is still there, you can scan the QR code and it will take you to this document, which is, again, like this 20-something page document just about the creation of Willpower, the impetus behind the whole project, what it means to me, and some of the secrets and stories behind the tracks. And to my knowledge, no one has read it. I think I hid it too well. So I'm going to read it today. I'm going to read as much of it as I can. And, yeah. Well, if this isn't something that interests you, fine. Go do something else. I don't really care. This is very strictly a for me thing. Unless you're really if you're a big fan of Willpower, this will be more Willpower content. Hooray. Throw a party. All right. I'm gonna quit riffing. I'm gonna start reading. Hi there. If you're reading this, it means you were interested enough to download the album and potentially purchase it, check out the included virtual booklet, and then scan a mysterious QR code that led you to God knows where. Well, congratulations, this led you here, to me. I'm Scott, the band leader of the Evan Williams Project, and this album is a culmination of 3.5 years' work. Most of it's solo, but with the addition of 3 members to the band in the last 2 years, they've been roped into it as well. I know it's a pretty big shift from what we've usually done, so I sincerely thank you for investing your time into this album. It really does mean a lot to us. What's this document then? Well, in the past, I've included virtual booklets with all of my album releases, and placed alongside the song lyrics, I've often added some interesting tidbits and facts about each song and some backstory. What I found, though, was that I would often run out of room to say everything that I actually wanted to say, so this time around, and potentially going forward, I've opted to keep the virtual booklet pretty light on content, containing only the song lyrics and a link to this document at the beginning, should you decide to dig a little deeper. And what do you know? You did. So, welcome. I'm going to go song by song and talk a bit about the process, tell a few stories, and let you in on where all the juicy Easter eggs are. Consider it your VIP pass into the making of Willpower. I hope you enjoy the album. It's going to get pretty dark from here, so feel free to leave and come back if you start to feel uncomfortable. You're not alone. God bless. And stay safe. Scott. I read a comment on the full album video for Metamortality that said, quote, "Can the song start?" Obviously, this commenter got frustrated with the length of the introductory track to that album, Discovery, and vented his frustrations, presumably before closing the window and never listening to it ever again. In a different life, I may have deigned to take this comment to heart and resolve to make intro tracks shorter, or indeed not have them at all. But in this life, I like introductory tracks, and I think they are crucial for setting the mood and the volume of the album as a whole, so frankly, this commenter can go himself with a cactus. Echo primarily features the noise of a train coming in from the distance, slowed and heavily processed to sound otherworldly, like the train to the afterlife pulling in to welcome riders to eternity. As this album deals heavily with the topic of death and the supernatural, I thought this was a succinct and ethereal sound to welcome the listener into the tragedy that is about to unfold. You may ask what these strange digital noises are starting halfway through. I don't want to spoil it completely, but I will say that you should run it through a spectrogram. Originally, I had the idea of recording a short poem I had written and putting the first half of the reading on the last track and then the second half here in the first track so that it would be an echo of the end of the album. However, I wasn't able to get a recording of this that didn't sound cheesy and it didn't vibe well with the rest of the album, so I went with the train noises instead. I mentioned before that this album deals with death and the supernatural. This track lays down the foundation for the story to unfold, the impetus that drives the character in the story to make the decisions he's about to make. It's going to be pretty dark already, so I should mention that if you're not comfortable right now with reading about my mental health struggles or suicidal ideation in general, I would recommend that you stop reading this and maybe don't listen to the album until you're in a safe headspace. My intention with this album is not to glorify depression or recommend taking an action you can't reverse. In fact, it is quite the opposite. Over the years that I've been working on this album, I have dealt with severe mental health issues and found myself in some truly dark places. And writing this album has helped me process and overcome these struggles. My hope is that listening to it would be as much of a catharsis for you as it is for me, and that you know that you are not alone. The concept of this album shifted a lot from conception to now. I'll get into that a bit more later, but where it's ended up is in this thought. I've thought about suicide before, but never fully acted on it. What would it take for me to get to that point? That's obviously not a fun topic to explore, but it is a useful exercise. It's forced me to examine my negative feelings about what was going on in my life and really wrestle with the ramifications of these feelings. And what it eventually led me to is that for me to get to that point, I would have to lose everything. So this is a story of how I could lose everything. Cold night, then. The first step on this journey down the spiral. A scene I found myself in many times before, alone on a rainy night, contemplating my position in the world around me. A big part of this song comes from the fact that while I was writing it, I was being treated very poorly by my place of work and felt very much like I didn't belong there. This was a job that I was incredibly thankful for at first. It had come at a perfect time. I was doing something I loved doing and with people I enjoyed working with. Unfortunately, circumstances began to shift and an ugly undercurrent of disrespect and toxicity began to show itself, and suddenly I felt like I was being seen as an outsider. I wanted to leave, but I was being held back by the thought that this job had been a gift from God, and that maybe I should just hold on a little longer. The line, "If Jesus wants me here, he's going to have to try and change my mind," comes from that, though the here in the song really means here, alive, in the world. My faith and my struggles with it are a big part of my life, and by extension, my music, and I'm not afraid to question what I believe and wrestle with these ideas. A long time ago, when life was much worse, I came very close to making an attempt on my own life. My parents weren't home, and I was sitting on the wooden steps leading down to the garage. It was a week or two out from a relationship ending that left me in a dark spot, questioning my place in the world and if I was worthy of love. I sat there and I cried out to God that if he was listening and he wanted me to keep going, that he was going to have to show me that he wanted me to keep going, because otherwise I was ready to give up. A few hours later, the power went out, and my city was hit with a thunderstorm unlike any I had seen previously or since. I went outside into the storm with my buddy, and I told him that God sent me this storm. I don't know if he believed it, and I don't know if I fully believe it, but I am still here today, so I'm inclined to believe it. That day, he changed my mind. For the lead character of this album, sadly, his mind is not changed. And so, the first domino falls. Not You was one of 4 songs that I had originally written for this album back when the writing for it started at the tail end of 2019. The other 3 being Sets, Down, and the reworked Elegy from my 2017 demo, Take 2. Actually, now's a good time to talk about that. So come along with me back to the year 2019. And fair warning, this is going to be a long story. Okay, just like I'm looking at the pages and yeah, this is going to be a long story. Whew, okay. I had been working on a project called Hate Machine at this time, and at this point in my life, I had been married for 2 years and was working full-time. I went from working for Starbucks to working for a company fixing coffee machines for Starbucks to working at a startup tech repair shop to suddenly quitting said startup tech repair shop due to extreme values dissonance between myself and the owner. Working full-time, and especially in the service industry, meant that I was often coming home dead tired with just enough energy to cook and clean a little. And since my wife and I were both working, we tried to maximize the time that we had together during evenings and weekends. This left little, if any, time to actually work on music, which at this point I wasn't sure I was serious about anyway. That's really the only reason Hate Machine took as long as it did to finish. I maybe had a few hours a week to actually work on it in any capacity, compounded by the fact that I really didn't know what I was doing. I was recording guitars direct out of the preamp of a Line 6 Flextone 2 XL into an ancient version of Cubase and finishing off the tone with some really crappy cab sims in some free software I found. I recorded bass and keys through this terrible setup as well, and vocals through an SM58 connected to a Line 6 Pod Studio UX2, which had some truly awful built-in effects. I can't speak to the quality of the preamps because that thing is long gone now, but either due to inexperience or poor quality of the interface itself, I wasn't able to get a very good sound out of it. Not that I had any idea, I was just making music and having fun with it. And suddenly, I found myself unemployed. Starbucks wouldn't take me back. The manager at that store already didn't like me very much, but she also had a legitimate fear that she would hire me back and then I would leave again. And I can't blame her, she was probably right. I was having a really hard time finding a place to work and my mental health was taking a nosedive. Thankfully, my wife was making enough money for the two of us to survive off of, so I grabbed some gigs running sound for events at my church, thanks to the technical director there who took a chance on me. I made a few bucks here and there wherever I could, including performing in a small musical that paid me quite well for community theater and won me an award for community theater. But the majority of my time was spent at home, and I didn't feel like playing video games all day. So I worked on Hate Machine more than I had ever worked on anything before. Some perspective, I left that tech repair place in the summer of 2019, at which point I had maybe 2 or 3 songs on Hate Machine that I would consider done. By September of that year, I finished the album. Unemployment is a hell of a drug. So now I had this full-length album that I had worked for 2 years on, and I was really, really proud of it. I commissioned a family friend to make the cover art and paid a not insignificant amount of money for it. At this point in time, I was a big fan of a number of big Bandcamp artists, and I knew I was going to launch the album on Bandcamp, but I thought it would be really cool to have it be a pay-what-you-want thing. I really appreciated when artists did this because we really didn't have a lot of money, and I was finding it hard to justify spending $10 to $15 on a digital album. So whenever I saw an artist say, "Hey, you can just have this, pay me if you like it," I always felt a deep respect and admiration for them. However, my ego got to me. I showed the album to my family, and they were very supportive, bless their hearts. But when I mentioned that I was thinking of this pay-what-you-want structure, they admonished me. "You worked so hard on it," they said. "You deserve to be paid for your hard work." They weren't wrong, per se, but a lesson I learned very, very quickly when I released Hate Machine out into the world was this. If this is your first full album release and you don't already have fans who you know will give you money for the album, don't charge $10 for the album. It was an utter, abject failure. Dead on launch. Not even my family bought it. In fact, the only money I ever saw from this was a few bucks that 2 of my friends sent me, and 1 person who discovered it on a whim and purchased it. But this was after I reduced the price to $7 and then a week later to the pay what you want like I had originally intended. This was absolutely devastating to me. Here I was, thinking that I had done something worthwhile and that all my hard work was going to lead to something, and I was being proven wrong in real time every single day that I went to that Bandcamp page and saw $0 on my lifetime sales. I fell into a deep downward spiral and had to work very, very hard to keep myself from getting into a terrible place. My meds helped. My wife significantly helped. My therapist helped too. Eventually, I came to a conclusion as to why the album was performing poorly, and it came down to a matter of barriers. Barrier 1. It cost money. This, and I still believe this to be true, is one of the biggest hurdles to get over when you want people to listen to your music. If it's not easily available somewhere that someone can get it for free, nobody is going to listen to it. So to solve this for next time, I vowed to make sure all of my music would be pay what you want. Check. Barrier 2. The production was bad. Listen, we can get into subjectivity all we like, and we can pull up the early pioneers of black metal and how popular these records are, despite what one can only describe as brutally raw production. It doesn't really matter. I wasn't making black metal, and I wasn't aiming for the album to appeal to those who do. So the appreciation of what I have come to describe as filtering it through a chainsaw-style production did not hit my target audience. So to solve for this next time, I vowed to learn everything I could about music production. Check. Barrier 3. Most people just don't like heavy metal. This is an unfortunate reality that if you're the kind of person who wants to make heavy metal, you simply end up accepting. Genre preference is a gray, amorphous blob inside people's brains that can be influenced in a number of ways, and people who are very open to experience, like myself, get to find music in any genre that they like. But as a rule, for the general population, you simply cannot convince someone to enjoy a genre of music that they don't already like. Again, we can talk about subjectivity and personal experience, yada, 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 but most people who don't like heavy metal will turn off a song if it's heavy metal. You get no chances with these kinds of people. And I've learned since that this is totally, completely fine. Audiences are self-selecting. People who like your style of music will find you eventually, and you wouldn't want your audience to be full of people who don't like the kind of music you make. This was a hard pill to swallow, but to solve this for next time, I vowed to simply accept that, you know what? It's not the end of the world if, say, my in-laws don't buy my album. My friends and family will support me in other ways. They don't have to like my music. So hey, barriers identified, plan of action determined. Great, let's go. I will point out that in each case, I ended in a place of, okay, this was the problem, so next time I will ... Instead of doing what I would imagine many in my situation would have rightfully done, which is quit. I'm not going to pretend I'm some bastion of willpower and virtue and that I grit my teeth and pushed forward or anything. Honestly, I just felt like I had gotten into the habit of working on music in my spare time, and I thought it was fun, and I still wanted to do it. I was watching a lot of YouTube tutorials on production, including from Spectre Sound Studios, Warren Hewart, Dan Worrell, and Devin Townsend, and I really enjoyed learning new stuff, and I kept wanting to try things out. And I was still unemployed. I had no reason not to keep making stuff. This led me to November. I had acquired some very nice gear by the end of Hate Machine that I had never used on the album because I didn't want to have to go back and re-record everything I had already recorded. While I was fixing coffee machines, I had made enough money that I was able to buy a Fractal Axifex 2 XL Plus off of eBay for about $1,500 Canadian. The headphone jack was busted and still is, but this was still an amazing find, and it was incredibly easy to get good tone out of it. My dad, in a series of Craigslist trades, had recently acquired a Gretsch Electromatic Jet that he let me borrow, and I was still playing with the church worship band fairly regularly at this point, so I needed some good clean tones, which led me to the Worship Tutorials DC30 preset for the Axifex. The combination of that guitar through that preset blew my freaking mind. I had never really been interested in the idea of doing, quote, clean music until hearing this Gretsch through this amp, and all of a sudden, I really wanted to give it a shot. But I didn't want to commit to doing a full album just yet. So I hatched a plan. If you've never heard of Inktober, it's a daily drawing challenge that takes place during the month of October, wherein every day you are given a different prompt that you must take inspiration from to create a piece. I have a lot of friends who are visual artists, and I was, and still am, terminally online, so I really enjoy seeing Inktober being done every year. But at the back of my mind, there was always a twinge of jealousy. It seemed like a lot of fun to be placed within this creative constraint of having to work off of a prompt, and also that you must create something every day for the month. I wasn't a visual artist, though, so why couldn't I, a musician, do something similar? Well, why couldn't I? I couldn't think of an answer. I was still unemployed. I had all these things I wanted to try out. I hadn't had much of a chance to play with all these presets on my shiny Axifex, and I really wanted to get better at production. So Oh no. I thought, I'll just do my own version of this challenge. And November was born. Every day for the month of November, I had to write, produce, and publish a new song based off of prompts that I made up. Those are the only rules. This gave me tons of freedom to try out different sounds that I would have never thought to try, and workshop song ideas that had been sitting in my brain for a long time. Doing this project was a lot of work, but I learned an incredible amount about production and songwriting by doing it, and I came out the other end of the month feeling creatively renewed and feeling ready to write another album. My dad loved the project so much that he gave me the Gretsch for my birthday. He really wanted to see what I would do with it. But I was torn between wanting to do some more heavy music with my leveled up production skills and doing something cleaner and more accessible with this gorgeous guitar. So I decided to do both. I would make an EP of heavy rock music and an EP of singer-songwriter type music, and I would release them under different names. The Evan Williams Project for the heavier stuff, and Sansevan for what soon became internally referred to as the Chill Project. What the fuck is Sansevan, you might ask? Well, I was going with the joke that Evan Williams, who is not in the band, was actually the drummer, which would be funny because there was no drummer, it was all programmed drums. So an album without drums would be Sans Evan. I then put Sans Evan into Google Translate to try and retroactively justify this naming convention, and discovered that it was, and I'm putting very heavy quotes around this, kind of a Hindi word that meant sensing. I didn't bother verifying this, so I decided to roll with it and said to myself, okay, this album is going to have no drums, it's just going to be your voice and this beautiful, clean guitar. Which was a nice idea. I got to work playing around with this preset, which had a really fun, if a bit cliche, delay effect where one side is a 1/8 delay and the other side is a 1/8 dotted delay to make bouncy rhythmic notes. I liked interacting with this delay and found that playing note-focused riffs instead of chord-focused ones played quite well with it, and I ended up writing the bones of the first 4 songs just by doing that. One of these songs, as I mentioned before, was a rewrite of Elegy off of my first demo, but I did enough to it that it basically became a brand new song anyway. But these 4 songs took a back seat as I found myself in a very strange and very frantic place while writing 2430, the heavy rock EP I was working on at the same time. That EP took over most of my time, and that's a story all to itself, but I made a promise that I would pick these songs back up after that album was out. What happened instead was I went from 2430 straight into Metamortality when the response to the former was unexpectedly quite positive. It was heavy and dark, but much more well-produced than Hate Machine, and people really liked the opening song, Zero, which had originated as a song that didn't make it onto that album. So I thought, all right, I'll give the heavy metal thing another shot. And that's yet another story for another time. 8 months later, Metamortality released. I got all of my anger out. I did November for a second year in a row, titled November 2 Eclectic Boogaloo. Time to work on the Chill Project now, I thought to myself. Then my sister messaged me and asked if I wanted her to drum for my band. And I said yes. And suddenly we were booking gigs, and that took up almost all my attention. But having Lonnie join up gave me an idea. Lonnie is an excellent drummer, but she's also an excellent vocalist, and we sang together a lot on our church worship team. What if I got her to sing on the Chill Project? That would be fun. Maybe I should remake the song Contact off of Hate Machine and have her join me on vocals for it, because her and my parents really like that song, And the process continued until suddenly the Chill Project was no longer a Sansavan thing. It was the Evan Williams Project thing. And I got to break out those 4 songs again. Not You was the first. It's in standard E tuning and has a heavy focus on a repeating guitar part like most of the album. The lyrics came well after I'd already written the lion's share of the instrumentation and are inspired, like most of the lyrics off this album, by some rather intrusive thoughts that I've had. Mainly, what would happen if I placed my trust in someone who I couldn't trust? What would happen if I committed myself to them, opened my entire vulnerable self to them, only to discover that they didn't have my best interests in mind? I should mention that this does not, in any way, reflect on my relationship with my wife. My wife has been spectacular in ensuring that I can be vulnerable with her and that I can always trust that I am safe with her. This is in stark contrast to the relationship I had had previously, in which vulnerability was often met with disdain, instability equated with weakness, and personal failings viewed as inherent, unchangeable character flaws. Don't get me wrong, I am not a perfect human being, and I contributed a great deal of negativity to that relationship as well. But it did scar me, and the loss of that relationship that I had invested heavily in and was certain would lead to a long, stable life together created a great deal of insecurity, anxiety, and distrust in me that I am still learning to let go of. All of that is present in this song. Placing my trust in someone else became placing my life in their hands. And while I was willing to do so, I had to make sure that it was someone who would take care of me, to defend this heart of mine from what may hide in the dark and empty corners. Fortunately for me, in real life, I found someone like that. Unfortunately for this album's lead character, they did not. And so, the second domino falls. Sets was the second of the original 4 songs written for this album and was probably my favorite until much later in the writing process. I really enjoyed the progressive time signature shifting and interacting with the guitar delay throughout, and lyrically it is more metaphorical than much of the rest of the album, which appealed greatly to the English major in me that never got to finish his degree. The song starts with a plea to the love interest of the previous song, that even though the protagonist knows that this person is wrong for them, doesn't have their best interests at heart, they still beg them to stay, please. As the sun sets down, the sun sets far away from me. Not only is it getting darker, but the light is getting further away, and the promise that the light may return does not seem as trustworthy as it once was. This is a great time to talk about the state of the world and life as an artist. Being unemployed, working my ass off on my art for no money, and suffering from severe depression changed the way that I viewed the world around me. It really isn't until you're unemployed that you realize how much value is placed on what you do, and how critically undervalued art is as a whole. If we plugged in the amount of hours I had spent writing Hate Machine, an album that has a lifetime sales figure of about $20, into a calculator, it would come up with a depressingly tiny dollars per hour. From a financial standpoint alone, I would have been significantly better off working at a minimum wage job. And as I soon discovered, from a social standpoint, I would have been significantly better off working at a minimum wage job. When I told people I was a barista at Starbucks, a job that paid me poverty wages and was so stressful and exhausting that I was actually considering suicide, it was often met with, quiet contentment, sometimes admiration. People really like Starbucks, and baristas do get some nice perks like free coffee, which really helps with the whole devastation to my mental health aspect of the job. Overall, my working at Starbucks was seen quite positively by my friends and family. But tell people I'm currently unemployed, writing music in my basement, hoping to work as a musician, that is a surefire way to get people to think less of me. This is not, by the way, because I had shitty friends. I love my friends. But in a society that revolves around money, the amount of money you generate is seen as a measure of virtue and a representation of value as a whole. Working at Starbucks? Good person. Doing their part. Generating value. Making art? You might as well be dead. This is a multifaceted issue that involves how we value art and artists, but the unfortunate reality is that we've decided that if you're not making money, you don't deserve to live. And it is incredibly difficult to make any money making art. So, this next verse, grays and green are the colors that remain from all the ones I used to see. The vibrancy and the joy of creation is no longer there, replaced only with lifeless shades of gray and the green of money, which is, after all, the central value point of society as a whole. Our protagonist has lost creative freedom and can only focus on what makes them money. A fate worse than death, in my view. The rest of the song is similarly focused on the woes of the artist in a capitalist society, that when times are tough, creative expression and the dream of being an artist must die in service of doing something, quote, worthwhile. A nostalgic remembrance of childhood spent in the fields when creativity was valued and play was possible, now frozen over as the sun sets and the season of life changes. And finally, a pointed attack on those who maintain power in the system, who have the means to change society but refuse, instead taking contentment in those stuck out in the cold. The artists, the dreamers, those who do not generate monetary value for the capitalist system. And those dreamers work and toil and suffer, setting themselves alight to make fire which is valuable not in the amount of money it generates, but in the warmth it provides to others nearby. Just as I discovered these truths about how society views me as monetarily worthless, so too does our protagonist. And the third domino falls. Let's get one thing out of the way. Disincarnate is a weird word. It's not something you'd typically use unless you are a member of the band Disincarnate. I assume, though, that they are using the word as an adjective, meaning free or freed from the demands of the body. I use it here as a verb, and I will quote from Wiktionary. 1. Transitive, to divest of body, to make immaterial. 2. Religion, intransitive, to die, in context of subsequently existing outside of the body, for example as a soul or a spirit. This gives you an idea of where the character's at in this point of the album, but actually, Disincarnate was the working title I had for the next track in this album, Vanishing Act. So what happened there? Holy hell. Holy hell. Man, I write a lot. These two songs were written much later than most of this album. By the end of 2021 or so, the tracklist had gone from Not You, Sets, Down, Elegy, with an added Contact after Lonnie joined the band, to a much more expanded one. Echo, Cold Night, Not You, Sets, Down, a transition track I hadn't written yet, Elegy, Contact, Harlequin, and then a final track that was mostly noise. But listening back to the album as it was, I felt like something needed to come between Sets and Down because, spoiler alert, in Down, the protagonist does end up making an attempt on their own life. And I didn't feel like the events up until that point were, for lack of a better analogy, horrible enough for this character to go through with it. 3 songs. One where they feel alone and unwanted, one where they realize their loved one isn't the right person, and one where they reckon with how devalued they are in society, didn't feel like enough to drive this character, who, if you'll remember, is a stand-in for myself, to try and end their life. This album was, after all, an exploration into what it would take for me to want to end my life, and it just wasn't at that point yet. So I needed some extra tragedy between Sets and Down. Maybe one more domino in the chain. That ought to do it. I had a riff I had written for November 3, the third one. Yes, at this point it had been another year. That was really proggy and clean and nice. You can check out that particular song at the second link in the description. I really liked it, and I wanted to expand upon it in both scope and progressiveness, so I did what I hadn't done since trying to write solos for 2430. I sat down in front of Guitar Pro, and I composed the song there. Most, if not all of my songwriting process ends up being done in the box in my DAW, because more often than not, when I get a song idea, it'll materialize as a fairly well-formed thing in my head. And then I'll mull over it for days, weeks, months even, before eventually I sit down at my workstation and just kind of vomit it all out into a project. I've always had a music-oriented memory, and even when I was a kid, I was able to memorize songs and lyrics quite easily, which lends itself greatly to my ability to write and visualize music in my head. But sometimes I want something very specific, and when that happens, I'll either write out notation by hand, or I'll use a program like Guitar Pro, which I found makes writing my kind of music, specifically, very easy to do. So I expanded this riff out, and I came up with this song in 12/4 with a dual guitar lead that goes into a huge synth bass-led solo section with shifting time signatures, and I really, really liked it. I also found that I had a lot of fun writing lyrics that weren't rhythmically consistent with the instrumentation. Sometimes they were in time with the guitars, and sometimes they weren't. The very first lyric that popped into my head when listening to the instruments on their own was, "One day I'll wake up with long hair and makeup." And I loved that rhyme scheme and rhythmic structure, and I thought about people who might listen to it and be shocked at long hair and makeup. "What's this guy doing wearing makeup?" they might exclaim with all the indignant insecurities society expects them to adhere to. I should specify, I've got no problem wearing makeup. I went to theater school. I've done drag roles, I've had professional photos taken. Makeup is not inherently belonging to one gender or the other. I've met lots of people, of all genders, who wear makeup, whether it be some barely noticeable cover-up and accentuation of facial features, to full-on funky lipstick and exaggerated contours. If I had the time, energy, and care for my personal appearance to do so, I could see myself wearing makeup as a regular occurrence. I don't, because I can't be arsed, but I can imagine that if I did, a few of my more, shall we say, traditionally masculine friends who aren't totally comfortable in their identity would have some choice words to say about that. Also, I really like having long hair, and I've spent most of my life hearing bullshit jokes about it making me more feminine. It's my hair. I can do what I want with it. So I decided to f with those guys a little bit. Yes, it's still long hair and makeup, but it continues with my mind. Oh, he was just making up his mind. He wasn't actually considering having long hair and wearing makeup. And to that I say, can it be both? I'm getting a little off track here, I apologize. So I started writing this song, and what came out of it was this idea of how life is kind of a series of just waking up one day and things have changed. Maybe sometimes it can feel like I have agency. I can listen to the music I liked when I was a kid. I can cut my hair when I want to. but ultimately it's pointless. I'll talk more about the lyrics when I get to Vanishing Act, but the idea was that this next domino was the acceptance of nihilistic thought, the embrace of the void, and that if my whole life is just a series of waking up and things change, maybe that's what will happen to me after death. Maybe I can just hit the reset button and try again from the beginning. Sure, I don't know what will happen to me, but nobody cares about me anyway, so I'll just go to sleep and pray that one day I'll wake up again and things will have changed. I will disincarnate, as it were, be briefly freed of my body and made immaterial until the day that I become material again, if that day comes. And that song was, in my opinion, very good. I thought it was a great stepping stone into Down, the final acceptance of nihilism and the near turning point for our protagonist into their suicide attempt. But there was one more piece missing. Sets into Disincarnate, later Vanishing Act, didn't feel right. Maybe it was to do with the rhythm. Maybe it was just too much of a jump from society hates me to life is a chain of meaningless events. Whatever it was, I felt like I needed one more domino in between the two songs. So I sat down with my bass guitar, around for an hour or two, and came up with some fun chords that I then played an E-bowed guitar over. I liked it. It was very moody, yet very groovy, and it inspired me to write some lyrics about the hopelessness I was feeling about the ongoing environmental degradation humanity has caused. As I mentioned before, I am terminally online, and I am constantly reading article after article about anthropogenic climate change and the effects it's having on the world at large, and predictions on how long it'll be until certain areas of the world become unlivable, and how the vast response from those in power has been to do nothing. I felt helpless to do anything. I felt numb to it all. I felt sometimes like every breath I was taking air away from something that deserved it more. Here was the next domino that I, and by I mean the protagonist, needed. I felt alone. My relationship was failing. My work, and by extension my life, was not seen as valuable. And now, the world felt like it was ending, and there was nothing I could do about it. Oh, it's all coming tumbling down. Won't want to be here when the stones hit the ground. The darkness shows itself. Everything is falling to pieces, and the intrusive idea that maybe it's time to get out before it gets worse starts to make a little bit of sense. The fourth domino falls, and there's two more to go. If there was ever any hope of turning back, it's gone now. Mental health check. You doing okay? It's okay to take a break. I often found that listening to music that dealt with the feelings I was experiencing during my down days was a cathartic experience, as though putting those feelings into words and music made them easier to parse and less visceral. It's also how I feel when I write music. The emotions become a part of the song, isolated inside a glass bauble that isn't part of me anymore, and I'm able to better deal with extreme emotions when they're outside of myself. However, I understand that this is not a universal truth. The content in this album may very well be triggering for some, and if that's you listening to this right now, I want you to know that you are not alone in how you're feeling. Everything I've been writing about has been rooted in truth. It became apparent to me after writing Down that I wouldn't be able to dress this album up with inauthenticity or imagined experiences. It all had to be real, with some room, of course, for storytelling and artistic flourish. By this, I mean to say that if all this negativity resonates with you, it resonated with me too. But these negative feelings don't last forever. The pain does go away with time, even though right now it feels like the most powerful thing in the world. You are stronger than it, and you will be made even stronger when you get through this. I say when, not if. There is no if. You will get through this. Do you know how I know that? Because I got through it. And I am no better or stronger or smarter than you are. Because so many of my friends too got through it, and they are no better or stronger or smarter than you are. You don't need to be anything other than who you are. All you need is a little bit of willpower. And you have that. I promise. Even if it doesn't feel like it. You are not alone. You can make it through this. It's totally okay if you need a bit before we move on, or if you stop listening here. I won't think any less of you. It's about to get a whole lot worse. So please, I'm serious. If you're not comfortable hearing about this right now, don't feel like you have to keep listening. Put that box of dragons back on the shelf and go listen to Wildwoodkin. Link in the description. It's a phenomenal album, and it always gets me out of a bad mood. I'll still be here when you get back. Hey, you're back. Or maybe you never left. Either's good. Welcome back. Let's dive in. I basically said everything about the writing of this one up in the section on DISINCARNATE, as that was the original title and track position of this song. You can scroll back and check that out. But a quick TLDR is that this is the song where nihilism wins. As someone terminally online with clinical depression, I am no stranger to nihilistic thought. It's a way of thinking that was simultaneously upsetting and comforting all at once. After all, if nothing really matters and everything I do is pointless, then I can do anything I want. But then again, if I do anything I want, it would be pointless because nothing really matters. This is the kind of feedback loop I would get caught in on my worst days, and it's taken many years of behavioral therapy, medication, and emotional support from my wife to recognize this feedback loop when it occurs and get myself out of it. It doesn't help that I'm inherently cynical and tend to ask myself questions I don't know or don't want the answers to. After all, who hasn't thought about what happens after death? Who hasn't wondered about the nature of our existence? Who, upon seeing the images from the James Webb Space Telescope, does not feel infinitesimally small in the face of a massive, uncaring universe? For our main character, the weight of perceived meaninglessness starts to blur the lines of their life. The passage of time feels like falling asleep and waking up to things being different. They describe their existence as a divine misalignment, and remember that they tried to end their life 3 times previously but were unsuccessful. They try to exercise creativity but are unsatisfied with the result despite losing sleep over it. They try to exercise control in the only way they feel like they can: a haircut. I've grown and cut my hair many, many times over the years, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that sometimes a haircut does indeed feel like a new life. When I went from shoulder-length hair to a buzz cut, I felt like I was starting something over. Maybe that's just the inherent dramatist inside me, or maybe there's something more there. Either way, it's a reliable way for me to feel like I maintain control over my life. The push and pull of intrusive thoughts comes up here, and it's one I've lived through many times. I don't feel alive, so why not die? Well, I don't want to die, but I don't feel alive, and so on and so forth. I will say that I am blessed in the infrequency with which I have actually felt like I wanted to stop living. I am very lucky that my suicidal ideation was so often just that and nothing more. But I had countless days where life lost its luster, where I was desensitized to anything I could possibly derive meaning from. Joy, anger, sadness, love, hate, all of it replaced only by a dull void. What is being alive without these feelings? Even negative emotions still carry with them the vibrancy of life. And this thought, I think, is what's kept me here. The experience of being alive with all its downfalls still outweighs the idea of being without it. I actually think that it helps that I'm not fully certain in my beliefs of what will happen to me when I die. I think that if I truly 100% believed that there was an afterlife, no doubt about it in my mind, I probably wouldn't be here. Not so for our unfortunate protagonist. They ascribe to the line of thinking that I've seen a lot, that there was nothing before you were alive, and then you woke up. So when you die, there will be nothing again, until you wake up again, and you won't remember any of it. This is kind of a comforting way to think, albeit a pseudo-spiritual take on reincarnation, but it's enough for our main character to take inventory of the way their life is going and make a decision. They can feel it call again. Fourth time's the charm. Disincarnate, disarm, and decide that it's time to take revenge. Because one day I'll wake up and no one will give a fuck that I tried, so I guess that'll be the end. In this sense, the act of ending their own life is not just a way to escape the pain they're experiencing. It is an act of violence, a method to push back and force those who they believe have wronged them to suffer in return. I reckoned with this idea when I was writing Hate Machine in the generating process for the song Crush Depth, which was then re-recorded for Metamortality. A close friend of mine had made an attempt on their own life, and it triggered my own intrusive thoughts to come to the forefront. They survived and are still alive to this day, and I cannot be thankful enough. But it got me thinking about why the idea of suicide seemed at all tempting to me. This concept that suicide was not an escape, but an act of revenge, was what I identified my own feelings to be. The thing that appealed to me about it was the idea that ending my own life would cause those who hurt me to be hurt in return. So that ends up being the protagonist's second to last reason in this list of reasons to make the choice they make. Because they have been wronged. So this will make things even. I don't believe this is actually true, by the way, but a lot of untrue things feel true when they come up in these moments. Suicide is never the answer. It is not a method of getting revenge, and there will be no satisfaction to be derived from it. The only thing it does is cause harm to the ones who love you the most and put an end to any future happiness you might have with them. There is nothing to be glorified, and I don't aim to glorify it in this album, only to examine my own feelings and, hopefully, help you examine yours. With all that being said, it's 5 down, 1 to go. Hold on tight. This next one isn't going to be a fun ride. I'm going to start by talking about something that probably only I care about, in the hopes that it will provide enough of a buffer between these two depressing topics. Programmed drums. Lonnie, my sister, is an amazing drummer. This is a truth. This album, like my previous albums up to this point, is almost entirely programmed drums. This is also a truth. How do you, Scott, reconcile these two truths? I can hear the naysayers crying out. How can you have an amazing drummer in your band and not have her actually drumming on the album? Believe me, I would have loved to have my sister drumming on this album. The plan going forward is to have her drumming on every album. We recorded her drumming on our Diamond sessions of Little Monster and Regulator, both of which came out before this album. So what gives? Time and money. By the time Lonnie joined the band, I was already writing this album, and by the time I recorded her vocals for Contact, the instrumentation for this album was 90% done. Remember when I mentioned what the album looked like before I wrote Disincarnate and Vanishing Act? All those songs had drums already, because I was writing the songs in the box and I wrote them with programmed drums. And I use Easy Drummer, which is a phenomenally good drum sampler. So we're talking 8 songs with great sounding drums that the songs were written around, already mixed. And then we start gigging, and then we're doing a bunch of other stuff. So we found ourselves mid to late 2022 looking at the album and going, okay, we've basically got 90% of this album already done. The drums, while programmed, sound great, and they fit the songs perfectly. Scott's been working on this album since 2019 and wants to get it finished. So here are our options. Number 1, record Lonnie's drums for every song ourselves. This would mean she would have to learn 10 songs to a recording level capacity, which would probably take a few weeks, less if she takes time off of work. That's a big ask already. But then we've got to track every single song, which means we have to bring the mobile recording studio to the lockout space where her drums are, which we only have access to 2 days out of the week because we share it with 2 other bands. And then we have to do everything that's involved in recording drums, which is, in no uncertain terms, a massive pain in the ass for everyone involved. And then Scott has to mix the drums again from scratch for every single song, which is going to take another few weeks, less if he takes time off of work, which is a big ask. So we're looking at a few months at the very least to get all of this done. Number 2, record Lonnie's drums for every song, but at a studio and have them mix it. This means that Scott has less work and we can rent a studio for like a week and knock them all out in a row. Not too shabby. However, and I cannot stress this enough, this is tremendously expensive and we do not have very much money at all. So that's out of the question. Number 3, record Lonnie playing the songs on an E-kit and run the MIDI recording through Easy Drummer. A little less work, but still a lot to ask of her, and honestly, if you're going to get the sound out of Easy Drummer anyway, we might as well, number 4, just keep the programmed drums. We opted for option 4, for the sake of our sanity, our time, and our wallets. We hope you can find it in you to forgive us, if you even noticed that the drums weren't, quote, real anyway. I think while I'm on this subject, I might like to address the topic of songwriting. For this album, I have been the primary songwriter, save for one song, Witness, which I'll talk about when we get there. I have a little gremlin in my head that tries to anticipate what people might criticize about me or my endeavors. And that little gremlin has been very loudly calling me a dictator for forcing my bandmates to go along with my artistic vision. We play the songs I wrote in the way I wrote them, generally. And when it comes to writing the album, it's still my music. I'm just bringing them along with me. I don't think this is the way that my bandmates feel about me. They all signed on to play the music that we had, and the music we had was all stuff I had written to that point. And on a more general scale, I tend to have more free time than they do, and by extension, more room to experiment with ideas. Ergo, I tend to write more music. I do work hard to make sure that this band is a collective artistic experience, whether it's offering each member a choice in our Diamond Sessions covers or the way in which we evenly split both costs and revenues across the board. In the interest of time, it just worked out that I do the majority of the writing for this album. It was, ostensibly, my story to tell, and a lot of it had already been written. Something too many cooks, you know? With that being said, I look forward to writing more music with Lonnie, Isaac, and Jackson. And I'll touch more on that when we get to the next song. Okay, that should be enough of a buffer. Let's move into Down. I've described the events of this album as dominoes falling in sequence. For our protagonist, the chain of events are as follows. They discover they do not belong as much as they thought. They discover that their relationship is not as rock solid as they thought. They wrestle with the fact that the world around them views them as worthless. They reckon with the powerlessness in the face of a seemingly inevitable crisis. They start to lose a sense of self altogether and give in to nihilism. All that is already a lot to deal with. But the final domino, the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back, is this. Someone tries to help. I don't mean help in the sense of, for instance, giving them a phone call and checking in, inviting them over for a meal, taking them out for coffee, actually sitting down and talking through the feelings they're feeling and offering sympathy and authentic relational connection, maybe suggesting they seek professional assistance. You know, things that might actually help. I mean the kind of help that you get from people who have low awareness of mental illness and think it's the kind of thing that you can pray, eat, or jog away. I have met far too many people like this. As someone who has dealt with mental illness for a good part of his adult life, these kinds of people infuriate me. It's hard to place any kind of blame on them if they're just or uninformed, but there's a certain subsect of person who insists that in spite of any evidence to the contrary, depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation are a symptom of some deep personal failure that can be overcome with simple life changes. Whoever is to blame for this line of thinking, they've unfortunately done a bang-up job convincing people that it's the truth, and the fires of hell itself don't burn hot enough to cleanse the sin they have committed against humanity as a whole. That's awfully hyperbolic, you might say. I did tell you that they infuriate me, I reply, smugly, before sipping on my soy latte and driving my car off of a cliff. I'm starting to realize this is becoming less of an album liner notes and more of a guided stream of consciousness writing exercise. I assume if you've made it this far, you don't mind. Also, I love you. Anyway, this song starts with one of those people. I originally thought I might get Lonnie to sing this first section to provide a clearer divide between the characters, but I came to the conclusion that this might paint a very negative light on her as my sister. The song's content is delivered from a family member of the main character, and they're doing a very poor job at actually helping him get any better. I didn't want to put that all on my sister. So I'm just assuming you, the listener, will read between the lines and clue into the difference between someone singing you, and I. The platitudes I use in these lyrical sections are all things I've heard before. It doesn't help to keep it all to yourself is a true statement, but it precedes some sentimental nonsense about how this house is a home and there's no secrets to be kept here. The chorus is a dismissal of the protagonist's feelings. You don't have a problem. You're just falling down for nothing. And I know the solution, says the family member. It's because you've been looking down. Duh. Why didn't I think of that? So our main character gives it a shot. Maybe they just feel lost because their generation has some flaw unique to them. Maybe they got their hopes up too high. Maybe they just haven't been practicing enough gratitude. They repeat the same words, but they make it personal. I'm falling down for nothing because I've been looking down on everything and everyone. It makes sense, of course. All these problems, all these feelings, they're just because our silly protagonist needs to change their outlook. Just look up, pick yourself up, smile more. Take inventory of all the good things in life. You'll feel better in no time. This patronization provides relief only momentarily. Reality sets in quick. I said all the right things. I believed all the right things. I'm looking up. I'm smiling. I'm practicing gratitude. I'm changing my outlook. Things are still bad. Suddenly, the meekness of our main character is replaced with anger. And this anger is no longer constrained by any semblance of appearing decent. They have lost everything that matters to them. They have tried to make things better. When it doesn't work, they clue into the fact that this person wasn't trying to help them at all. They were just trying to make themselves feel better. I know you think you're helping, but don't tell me how I feel, because to you, it's all delusion. But to me, it's all so real. The final domino falls. Our protagonist unleashes everything they've been hiding, providing visceral details as to what's happening inside them. A Satan in the weight has taken over their body and left them broken, empty, and without a future. So, why the hell am I still here? We have reached the tragic climax of this story. The anger has reached its peak, and there is only one thing to do. The ultimate violence. The perceived revenge. By committing violence to themselves, they in turn commit violence to all those who dared to know them. And as the blood starts to flow and the world loses its color, they wonder what God will do if they come to meet them. Will he punish me for acting out when he made me this way? After all, it's not their fault that they were driven to this decision. It was a very logical, if tragic, series of events that led them here, and surely God will have pity on them. In the end, though, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I just want to go away. It's too late now anyway. They have time for one last burst of anger, one last word of blame to drive the vengeful knife further into the hearts of their loved ones, and then quietly, with a whispered refrain, they slip into unconsciousness. I deliberately chose not to include the gruesome details of this undertaking simply because I did not want this song to be that potentially triggering for people. It's not a pleasant song. It's chock full of genuine anger and is meant to be shocking. But again, my intention with this album is not to cause harm, rather to examine my feelings in a safe, constructive manner. It is unfortunate that these are the feelings that I feel the need to examine, but I cannot change the cards I've been dealt. All I can do is present them in a manner that is authentic and artistically fulfilling. I deeply hope that you have not been hurt by this album. It's about to get better, so please stick around. We fade into darkness, maybe forever if you hit the stop button at this point on the album. If you didn't, well, there's still a few more songs to get through. Easter egg alert. That's an interesting rhythmic choice for the choir vocals at the end there. I wonder what that's all about. Okay, yesterday I spoke for like an hour and 20 minutes straight. This is day 2. Track 8, Witness. Oh, this is going to make me cry, I think. Yep. All right. Up until now, the overall tone of this album has been trending to the negative. I like my albums to have a through line to them so that the songs follow each other in a natural way and there is minimal tonal whiplash. And a visual I like to use a lot is that of a roller coaster. There's a gentle upward movement at the start, followed by a series of dips and dives and twists and turns, and whether those movements are in tone or lyrical content or beats per minute or whatever doesn't really matter as long as the songs still flow into each other. Knowing what this album was meant to be about from the outset, I spent a lot of time trying to smooth out the movement between songs, and that often involved writing entire new songs and then throwing them out. When I was just starting out, throwing out a song was a big deal. Every new song I came up with felt like it was inherently special and important and worth preserving, which I've heard is a common sentiment among beginning songwriters. It's kind of a numbers game. If you've only written 5 songs, song number 6 is 1/6 of your entire catalog. So of course there is some weight to that and often pushes you to spend an inordinate amount of time on a song that simply might not work. This happened to me a bit with Hate Machine, where I think I tossed out 3 song ideas that just weren't vibing with the album or just weren't working, period. One of these tossed songs became the basis for Zero off of 2430 and it fit a lot better there, but 2430 brought me my first breakdown over throwing out a song. That EP is only 6 songs, debatably 5, and as I have previously mentioned, the songwriting process for it was frantic and marked by some severe emotional turmoil. I was really close to finishing the album and was tracking the vocals for what was originally track number 3, which is a doomy song that I called Dead End Zone. These vocals were the last thing I needed to do before I could get the album out the door. Literally everything else was done. And I had already tested the album countless times in my car, on my headphones, as much as I could to check the flow and the overall vibe, and I was quite happy with it. Dead End Zone as an instrumental track was quite good, in my opinion, and I thought that it would be easy to complete. I was very wrong. The vocals just did not work. The lyrics were horribly cheesy and I couldn't take them seriously, and the harmonies were clashing with the instruments, and the overall production was wonky, and the whole track was just plain awful. I was listening to this as part of what I thought would be the final album check, and my heart sank into my stomach as the song finished. It's awful, I thought. I can't possibly ship this? Right then and there, a hurricane of intrusive thoughts ripped through my mind. It didn't help that it was 1 a.m, that I hadn't been sleeping well that week, that I was a little drunk, or that I had placed such high expectations on myself, or that I hadn't taken a step back and examined the track before adding vocals and noticed that it was really quite a boring song. All of these things made it very, very easy for some truly awful things that I won't repeat here to echo endlessly inside me. All of them untrue. But again, a lot of untrue things feel true when they come up in these moments. I place this moment as the third and hopefully final time that I ever came dangerously close to taking my own life. Luckily, some small part of me convinced myself to contact a helpline. I went online and sought out a local one that offered both a phone number to call and one to text. Phone calls give me anxiety, so I opted to send a text, and I received a text back saying that their operators were quite busy at the moment, but someone would get back to me in 5 to 10 minutes. I waited 10 minutes with no response. So I waited another 10 minutes. Then another. Then another. I never received a response. And I couldn't help but find that very, very funny in a morbid kind of way. Because here I was in crisis, and I was waiting 40 minutes to get a text back from a crisis line. I couldn't help but laugh. And that chased the thoughts away. And I felt a little better, and I went to sleep. I would then use the feelings that I had there as the basis for the song that replaced that track, titled Dreams Dispelled, which was an infinitely better track and one of my personal favorites to this day. Since then, I've written over 100 songs in the process of writing for the Evan Williams project, most of them for November and its 3 follow-ups. So I have generally shed any sense of deep personal connection to every single thing I write. For this album, there were 8 songs that I wrote, a good number of them pretty much done, that I threw out because they didn't fit the album theme or didn't flow well into the other songs. This slot on the album, between Down and Elegy, sat empty for a majority of the writing process. I knew something had to go between the 2 songs, but I didn't know how to go about it. Narratively, at the end of Down, the protagonist is attempted to take their own life. How would I get from there to Elegy, which is a song about nostalgia for the way what things once were? Also, Contact was the next song after, a song about questioning a supernatural experience and the nature of existence in general. How do I connect these points? My gut instinct was to say, okay, here's where we're going to put a song where the dude meets God or some angels or something. So I set out to make a song that sounded like the voice of angels, but I wanted them to be biblically accurate angels with all the weird and thousand eyes and voices singing in heavenly languages. That led me to make a track that was generally unlistenable, full of weird noise and screaming and backwards chopped up bits of other songs. I was quite proud of it for maybe a day, until I listened to it in context of the album and realized that it was horrible. Into the trash it goes. Okay, well, what if he doesn't meet God, but instead he wakes up in the hospital and there's someone there and he's singing to them now? Neat idea. I had also written a November track that could be reworked into that, so I set out turning that idea into a full track. It actually sounded quite nice, and it was very sentimental, and I based it off of my experience in the hospital when I was in junior high. I was bedridden for a few months due to a misdiagnosis, and nobody was sure I would make it out of there. And I liked it a lot. A few problems, though. It felt too sentimental, like something out of a romance film. It was significantly different in tone from the surrounding songs, and it wasn't authentic. Sure, I had been in the hospital, but the song was about someone near death, something that I hadn't experienced personally. It didn't fit with any of the goals on the album, so into the trash it goes too. What if I just do some piano chords with a bunch of reverb? I mean, yeah, you could do that, but it's gonna suck. Into the trash it goes. At this point in time, we're gigging as a band. We've just invited Isaac to join us on keyboards for the next show, and he hasn't played with us yet, and he's just bought a beautiful Nord Stage 3 that he's using on the church worship team. I was working for the church as their broadcast audio engineer, and during rehearsal one night, he starts playing with this patch he made that was a mix of grand piano sound and a looping arpeggiated synth. And I had a shimmer reverb on his keys track, and it sounded absolutely gorgeous. I approached him after rehearsal and told him how much I liked that patch and if he'd be open to coming over to record it, which he agrees to. He doesn't actually come over and record it until we've played a show together and we've offered him permanent membership, but once he does, I sit him down and I hit record and let him play around, and he tracks out this beautiful piano-led track. I then turn around and I add a few things to it, including a really interesting repeating textural percussion that he liked. However, I wasn't really able to turn it into a fully realized track due to a number of factors, so that one went into the trash too. Finally, though, I decided I would treat his track as something I could draw from rather than build around, and I clipped out a few really good parts of it while adding a bunch of new instrumentation around them. I was workshopping a cool vocoder heavy idea that I was really wanting to turn into something, so I merged the two together, and what came out was what is now this track, called Witness. It's a really uplifting, production-heavy track with some drum and bass elements and a big vocal finish, and the lyrics evolved into an affirmation of life and a reassurance that you are part of something greater, that you will always be good enough, and that you are not alone. This now brings me to my dad. I've dreaded writing about this part of the album because on January 25th of this year, 2023, my dad left us after a prolonged battle with cancer. For the weeks leading up to his passing, he was bedridden, and we spent a lot of our time going over there to see him. He would talk to us a lot about how he was dealing with the fact that he knew he was going to die, and about his philosophy on life, and how proud he was of us for doing what we loved doing and chasing our dreams. He was always an ardent supporter of the arts, of music especially, and he loved that my sister and I were in a band together, and he came to every show he could, shared every post we made, and told everyone who would listen about us and how much he loved our music. For all my life, my dad has supported me in everything that I do. He never once told me that I needed to give up my dream of being a musician, or an actor, or a writer, or a helicopter pilot, or a video game designer, or a comics artist, or any of the multitude of dreams I had when I was growing up. It didn't matter to him what I wanted to do. He would support me 100% of the way. He taught me how to play guitar, gave me my first guitar and amp, enrolled me in lessons, and was the kind of parent who would knock on the bedroom door when you were practicing and tell you to turn it up instead of down. He loved music, and he loved us, and I am so lucky to have been able to call him my father. During the final days he was with us, I bought a Zoom H2N recorder to leave by his bedside so that he or mom or anyone visiting could record conversations with him so that we'd have something to forever remember him by. We only got maybe 10 to 15 recordings, but what we did get, I will cherish forever. Among those recordings was one in particular in which Dad talks about an unbelievable, supernatural, beyond this world dream that he had. You've been up already to see the nurses and stuff?
Yeah, they were up here. I haven't been downstairs in 4 days, but
Yeah.
they came up and woke me up, or my mom came up and woke me up, and then she had a meeting with them downstairs for all the admin stuff that I don't really need to have anything to do with.
Well, you're not missing much down there. There's not a whole lot going on.
Yeah. No, and I don't need to be in there, and your mother looks after it anyway, so
Yeah.
she likes the idea that I'm aware of what's going on, and I do want to be aware of it. Set your priorities right.
Yeah, exactly.
Only so much you can do.
She was telling me I had a bit of a crazy dream last night.
Oh man, I tell you. Are you recording this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This was quite possibly the most unbelievable, supernatural, beyond this world experience, because I'm not sure that I can place it as a dream. So much of it I think was out of my control. It was being presented to me, not something that was being pulled out of me.
Yeah.
And these last few nights, last few days, I've been feeling pretty close to death, in a sense that I just have this feeling that it's getting really close now. Matter of days. So I've been expecting something. And middle of the night sometime, I was in this room, and it was a room that kind of went on forever in all different directions. And it was full of people. They were just passing by, and some would look at you as they went by, some would totally ignore you, some you looked and thought, hey, I know that person. And a lot of it seemed to be in kind of a slow motion thing, It was really hard to figure out what was going on. And there seemed to be things drawing me across the room towards certain people, and then it would turn. And then I figured out that I was kind of following somebody. And there was a man in front of me who, when I got close enough to realize, because he was quite a ways off, when I got close enough to realize, was in a gold filigree suit, like you got close enough you could see through it.
Yeah.
The closer you got to it, the less clear it was. Wasn't, it was the richest, brightest gold you could ever imagine. And the sense closer I got, the less all what it was. It seemed to be everything. And everyone seemed to be drawn to this figure that was walking and turning and going this way. And well, it didn't seem to have a general direction. But then he would sort of disappear into the crowd, and then the next minute he'd be in front of my face and walking past me like this. And when I looked in the eyes, it was like it was on fire. It was like, you can't describe it. It was an orangey, yellowy, goldy, fiery glow. It was shocking, but it wasn't scary. It was just kind of like, what was that? He had a hat on, like a fedora type thing, and this suit. And as he walked by you were just like you wanted to turn and follow him wherever he went. and you get distracted by certain things, and oh, what's going on over there, and then you realize I'm supposed to be following this guy, and I couldn't seem to quite break away, yet he wanted me to come with him. And I was having trouble doing it. And when I would try and I get too close, I could feel hands sort of holding me back. And then the room, sort of the dynamic of the room changed. It was like, okay, now we're all ready now. And he just kind of opened up. We all started going upwards, following this person. But we're just being held back, and it was like being tugged very strongly in two different directions. I really wanted to go, but for some reason I couldn't, right then and there. I sort of woke up. I was on a pile of people, but they weren't people, they were just kind of shapes, color. We were just all kind of moving, trying to go forward, and we couldn't. And everybody was crying. I was crying harder than I ever cried in my life. Everybody seemed to be in the same boat. We just couldn't get past that barrier. There's all these bright colored shapes that all just kind of be moving upwards and then coming back and moving upwards. It's like you're in a dog pile of, I don't know, multicolored cheerleaders. I don't know. But just through the whole thing, I was so confused.
You talking about last night?
Yeah. But it just felt, this is absolutely what's happening here. This is going to happen. This is where it's going. There's nothing like anybody has ever said it would be. Ever.
Did you want to talk about that now?
We're recording it.
Yeah, we got it.
So if we get it on tape, and then I'll tell the story again. Because I remember different parts of it.
This was an incredibly powerful experience for him, and listening to him describe it impacted me greatly. I wasn't sure how to reckon with it, nor was he, but it was the turning point for him. Whatever the dream was, it gave him a sense that it was time to leave, and he felt at peace with it. As this is all happening and we're preparing to say goodbye to him, we felt as a band that we wanted him to hear the full album, and we stepped up our efforts to finish it. This involved tracking the last few instruments and vocals for Not You, Elegy, and Witness, which we accomplished at our jam space with our mobile recording rig. As we were tracking Witness, Lonnie broke down. She said she didn't understand why, but something about this song reminded her of Dad. Isaac and I felt the same way too, but we couldn't reason why. I mixed the new tracks in and I rendered out a master of the whole album for Dad to listen to. We shared a really beautiful moment together. I brought my Sennheiser HT600s, my nicest pair of headphones, for Dad to enjoy the album with. He laid in bed and listened with his eyes closed for most of it as we sat next to him. There's a great photo that my mom took after the song Down started, which was far from being finished, and I leaned in and I told him, okay, so just so you know, the song's not finished yet, so it sounds a little rough. I haven't forgotten how to mix. And he laughed. his infectious, room-filling laugh that we couldn't help but join him in. He really loved the album. He said it was spectacular. And he and I were very happy he got to listen to it, even though it wasn't totally done. A few days later, I was working on Witness, and I felt like the ending was missing something. Here was this track about having a supernatural experience and having an otherworldly choir of voices provide assurance, which made sense at this point in the album as the protagonist was in, an altered state of being. But I couldn't bring them back down to earth. My original intent was to have the angelic voices repeating the opening lyrics, but that just wasn't working. I needed something to pull the main character back down. Something clicked. And suddenly I knew exactly what to do. I clipped the recording of my dad and added it to the ending of the song. And it was perfect. The song made sense, and suddenly the comment Lonnie had made about the song feeling like Dad made sense. Because now it was his story. A glimpse of authentic, supernatural reality. I took this master and I showed it to my mom, who then showed it to my dad. He broke down crying and told us how much he loved all of us. The next day, he fell into a deep sleep, and a few days later, he passed away. I'm going to tell you something that I've told a grand total of 3 people. My wife, my mother, and my therapist. You can choose not to believe any of it. God knows I'm having trouble believing it myself, but everything I'm about to say is 100% true. I woke up the morning of January 25th from an incredibly vivid dream. In this dream, I was at my parents' house and I was walking up the stairs to the master bedroom where my dad had been bedridden for the past few weeks. As I rounded the corner at the top of the stairs, I looked through the door and I saw that Dad was sitting at the edge of the bed. He turned to see me and smiled, and his smile lit up the room as though the sun had just risen. I started crying, and I moved towards him as he stood up and he opened his arms to embrace me. His words were gentle and calm, and his body was full of the strength that had left him as he told me not to worry. Everything was all right, he said. He was safe. He was okay. Everything was going to be okay.
and he told me that I was going to be okay. But he said he wanted to let me know that he was going to be leaving us this afternoon. I don't remember much of the rest of the dream after that, but I remembered those words exactly. I'm going to be leaving you this afternoon. I didn't mention it to my wife when she woke up, but when she got up and checked her phone, she saw some messages from my oldest sister who had stayed overnight. Dad's breathing was starting to rattle. My wife, who works in long-term care, knew what that meant, as did I. When we got to the house, the nurse who was there informed us that a rattling in breath typically means that the patient has less than 48 hours left before they pass. So it could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be the next, but it would be unlikely to be after that. As we gathered in the room, listening to Dad's labored breathing, I whispered to my wife about my dream and told her what he had said to me. She quietly nodded and didn't say anything after that. As it got closer to noon, we were all taking turns being close to him as he slept and continued to breathe shallow, rattling breaths. When I did, I whispered to him, "Did you come and visit me last night?" Which was met with a low moan, a noise he could still make from time to time. I told him that I appreciated that, and that he could come and visit me anytime he wanted. But also, I told him it's getting close to noon, and that he didn't want to be late. He took his last breath at 7:05 p.m. Read into this all you want. I already have. For one, 7:05 p.m. isn't exactly what I would call afternoon. For two, I'm not certain that God gives hall passes to people's subconscious minds, especially when they're not even in heaven yet. For three, I'm all too aware that dreams are just that, dreams. And trying to decipher the meaning in them is like trying to find faces in an image full of static. But there is a part of me, the part of me that heard my dad talk about his dream of following the man in gold upwards and thought it to be something amazing and worth sharing, that hopes that maybe Dad did come see me that night to let me know what was going to happen. There's a lot about this world, about life in general, that I will never understand. What I do know is that this song, Witness, isn't my song. It's not Isaac's song either, even though we co-wrote it. This song belongs to my dad. It always did. I just never knew it until it was finally done. And this song, the one truly hopeful moment in this entire album, the song that changes the narrative, that saves our protagonist from the edge of death and brings him back, of course it would belong to him. Dad was a beacon of hope in our lives. He was there for us when nobody else was. He saved us an uncountable number of times. He made our lives perfect. He made this song perfect. I really don't have anything else to say. I love you, Dad. I miss you every day.
Elegy was originally on my first full demo as the Evan Williams project, titled
Take Two. It's on our Bandcamp page if you want to listen to it, but I won't lie, it's pretty shitty. Oh no. I think I recorded the majority of it in Audacity using a free drum machine called Leaf Drums and manually writing out drum lines in Guitar Pro. With all that being said, there's a few good things on there that I wanted to revisit, which I did on Metamortality with the songs Baptism and Neophyte. When I wrote Elegy, it was before I was married, before I called it the Evan Williams Project, and before I had a Bandcamp page. I was releasing all my demos on SoundCloud at this point. I think a grand total of 3 people listened to Take Two, including my wife and I. And I wonder sometimes how I managed to get from there to here. One of my voice teachers at Studio 58, where I studied theater, told me that I was often living in memory. A nice way of saying that my trauma was seeping through into my work. That demo was steeped in memory. It was the first time I felt like I could express a lot of emotional baggage that I had been holding on to for a very long time. 6 out of the 10 songs were directly influenced by, let's just call it, the words I never said. This would eventually come to a head in the song Mind Break off of Metamortality, after which I can honestly say that I think I managed to get it all out of me. Elegy had a different meaning to it then. When I first wrote it, I was longing for the world on fire, a time when things were exciting, when new love was first sparking and passion and romance overrode everything. Originally, the line, "When it all collapses and you're still waiting there, will you remember the world on fire?" meant that when and if everything fails, if you're still around, that spark will still be there and maybe we can fan that flame again. There was a part of me that still wanted that then. Now, I'm more content to live in a world that isn't burning. Maybe the fire is exciting, but it's still fire. It's still dangerous. It still destroys. And at this point, our main character has come to the same conclusion that I have. It's safer to stay away. That person is the fire. I still see flashes of the color of your hair and the dying embers of a world on fire. Even if everything falls apart, even if that person is still there waiting for us to come back and set things ablaze again, remember what that was like. Remember the fire and how it ruined everything that kept us safe. Our protagonist has survived, has encountered the supernatural, and now makes the first wise decision of the entire album. They remove themselves from that person. Their near-death experience has completely changed their outlook, and they can see now how they can improve. But there's just one problem. Did any of that actually happen? When I first showed this song to my wife, back when it was one of the first few songs I recorded for Hate Machine, she was not a fan of the lyrics. She interpreted my metaphorical struggle of feeling lost at sea, searching for a sign of God, and feeling the terrible whirlpool of oblivion threatening to loom ever closer as a sign that I was losing my faith altogether. This is a fair assessment, but it was not an accurate one. I was raised into the Christian tradition and I attended a Baptist church until my preteens, at which point we started attending an Alliance church that was our spiritual home for almost 2 decades. During this entire time, I was encouraged, primarily by my father, to ask whatever questions I thought pertinent and to seek answers where answers were not easily provided. This has shaped my relationship with religious belief to the point where I am more than comfortable with examining my own beliefs and recognizing where my own blind spots are. Which makes me a pretty terrible evangelist if you go by the standards the church has been operating by for centuries. I would no sooner tell someone that my beliefs are the one true belief than I would tell them that Devin Townsend is the greatest musician of all time. I have little energy for zealotry. But obviously, not all people of any religious affiliation feel the same way. There are some who see any form of questioning of their beliefs as borderline blasphemous, and many who think that if one, quote, loses their faith, that they are forever doomed. These are a few among many untruisms that spread rapidly among congregants due to, I think, preying on a fear response. After all, if you start to question your faith, you might start to question your morals. And if you abandon your faith altogether, you will throw all moral propriety to the wolves and begin to live life selfishly and without fear of consequence. Or so the rabbit hole goes. I never thought this idea to be true. My wife, however, at least entertained the concept as being potentially true. And the threat of my abandoning faith, and by extension, my moral compass, proved to be enough of a threat, as false as it was, to warrant confrontation. I don't want you to take away from this that my wife is irrational. I actually believe that she was acting rationally in response to fear. It isn't her fault that the tradition we grew up in took advantage of her fear to instill beliefs that did not serve her well. And it's not like I don't have my fair share of those either. This situation was, though, the first time that my uncertainty showed itself fully to her, and her response was largely negative. We did talk about it. I explained my feelings to her and what the song meant to me, that it was a true depiction of my struggle with spiritual belief, and that it often felt like I was clinging on to whatever passing ship I could find, even at the risk of becoming imprisoned in the palace of a demagogue. A warm shelter and a place to sleep, albeit under the iron fist of a wrathful tyrant, is a better offer than being cold and tired, but free. This does not paint a beautiful picture of Christianity, and I don't think that it should. The song was written at a time in my life when I was spiritually desperate, seeking answers that were not being provided to me. I think this should have been the first sign that the church we called our home was not actually offering me anything in the way of fulfillment, and perhaps should have been the first sign that I did not belong there. I've had a number of experiences in my life that I can't explain. I've talked about 2 of them in this very document. And every time something like this happens, my initial thought leans more towards divine intervention than towards simple coincidence. But as the memory of them fades, the cynical part of my brain grows louder, and I find myself trying to talk myself out of any kind of spiritual association whatsoever. Do I really believe that God sent a great storm as a message that he wanted me to live? Do I really believe that God kept me alive in the hospital while the doctors failed to diagnose a potentially lethal issue for a month and a half? Do I really believe that God sent my dad to me in a dream to prepare me for his passing? The answer is, I don't know. Not just that, I can't know. If I say, yes, absolutely, 100%, the Abrahamic God of the Bible personally intervened in my life, that raises more questions than it gives me answers. If I say no, that's ridiculous. There is no evidence for the existence of any God, let alone the singular God I propose is responsible for these events, and these can all easily be explained, I am similarly left with more questions. Here is what I do know. My life, like all life, is finite.
My existence alone, devoid of any achievement, is nothing short of miraculous. I have had things happen to me that I cannot explain either through earthly analysis or a simple "God did it." One day, I, too, will come face to face with oblivion and pass into that endless sleep that none return from. What do I do with this information? I keep my head up. I move forward. I use the skills I've been blessed with to do things that benefit myself and benefit others. I continue to ask questions, and when I find answers that make sense, I dig deeper there. I'm at a place now where I'm starting to find answers that make sense. I found a warm shelter and a place to sleep. And it is true. It is better than being cold and tired. But in this place, I have also found freedom. That is what keeps me here. After experiencing the supernatural firsthand and making a critical life decision based on that experience, time passes for our main character. Who knows how long? Maybe days, months, years, even. The memory of that experience fades and the cynic gets louder. Was it real? Were you simply too desperate to think rationally? Have you made the right decision? They aren't able to find the answers to these questions. We're getting close to the end of the story now, and we haven't tied up all the loose ends. Perhaps if this album had ended with Witness or even Elegy, you could walk away from this experience feeling a bit lighter, having heard a story of divine intervention in the life of someone going through dark times. I considered ending the album there and cutting this song and the next two, but alas, the cynic in me won. Our protagonist doesn't ride off into the sunset, their faith in God and life and love renewed eternally to live happily ever after. Rather, they get to experience the same thing I do. More questions with no answers. More uncertainty. And while things are in order now, they will inevitably fall into disarray once again. And can they count on the supernatural to intervene when it does? Maybe the answer to that last question was yes. But once more, the cynic wins. In fact, another transformation is about to take place. This was originally going to be track 5 on the album when its skeleton was still in disorder and I was just writing new songs and seeing where they would go. But I moved it to the penultimate track position because I think this song is a culmination of everything that has been poured into this album from the very beginning. The pain of loneliness, the loss of love, of poverty and devaluation of work, of helplessness and crisis, of lack of agency, of the hell that is other people, of moving on and of uncertainty. And then to expect to simply keep going? Where does one find the energy? Where does that willpower come from? I've gone through 4 therapists in my life so far. One was only able to see me while I was a student. One switched practices. One left the practice altogether. And my current one, who has been wonderful. At some point, every one of them hears the story about how I got over my relationship ending, including the part about the storm, and then hears about what I ended up doing that changed my life entirely. After the storm and a following period in which I felt fairly useless, I was talking to my dad about some hang-ups I had about my physical appearance. My weight was, I thought at the time, one of the defining factors in my relationship failing. I had, indeed, let myself get quite heavy, and the primary stated reason my ex-girlfriend had decided to break up with me was because she was no longer attracted to me. Keyword stated. And I was feeling very bad about myself. But at the same time, I was feeling angry. It's not as though I chose to get this way, and it felt unfair to tell me that it was my fault, and it felt unfair to me to end what felt like could be a long-term relationship based on something as shallow as my appearance. Dad and I made a pact. We would go to the gym 3 times a week. If there was ever a day when one of us didn't want to go, the other got to punch them in the face. A pact backed up by violence. Unnecessary? Perhaps. Did we ever miss a day? No. We hit the gym 3 times a week for a year. At the start, it felt like dying. I was not physically fit, and I was having trouble using the machines without any weight on them at all. Running on a treadmill was out of the question unless we wanted to injure ourselves, so we used the elliptical machines. At this point, I started listening to very intense, angry music. I always liked metal, but I was never into the really heavy stuff until now. And as I sweat buckets, grinding away on that elliptical machine with brutal blast beats in both ears, all I could do was think about how angry I was and how much I wanted to win. I could picture myself showing up at an event with our friends, thinner and more muscular than I ever was, to rub in her face that this is what I could look like, that I could have been hers, that she fucked up. That anger kept me motivated to stay in the gym. And then it motivated me to go back to school. And then it continued to motivate me to restructure many aspects of my life that simply weren't helping me achieve my goal of complete and total success and, in my head, revenge. All of this negative energy was driving me to better myself in so many ways, and I started feeling really good about myself. And soon the idea of getting revenge came second to just enjoying being good at things. I was physically attractive and strong. I was doing well in school. I got a job that I actually liked, and I was making lots of time for my friends and my family. Eventually, I even asked this girl from church I liked on a date, and that's a whole other story. But all of this to say, when I was in a dark place, what I found worked for me to get out was to get mad. Obviously, this is a terribly unhealthy long-term solution to my problems, but all 4 therapists I've seen have said the same thing. Yes, your anger was being used as a defense mechanism, but defense mechanisms exist because they work. And sometimes they're exactly what you need to get you out of a crisis and back on your feet. That is what the song Hate Machine was about. Anger, rage, vengeance, spite, hate, all these feelings, while negative, are powerful motivators. They can be used to make positive change and to overthrow injustice. And the way I felt at this time in my life was that I was being powered by it, that my anger was the only thing that could drive me to accomplishing my goals. I was a machine fueled by hatred. I just want to specify, I don't mean hate as in prejudice on the basis of ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or similar grounds. That has no place. What I mean is overwhelming, passionate dislike. In this case, towards the way I was being treated and the person who did so. It all sounds a bit juvenile when approaching it from a place of emotional stability. But again, it was something I was doing to survive. And it worked. And so that's where our story is going to come to an end. Harlequin posits that the protagonist's efforts are all in vain. Working hard to make a change will only drain their strength. Earthly distractions only serve to make light of the inevitable slow descent to the end of their life. God decided their fate for them, and he is laughing as they suffer. I briefly studied the Commedia dell'arte in my first year of college, and I have forgotten almost all of it, but what I did retain was the idea of stock characters and archetypes. That certain characters would always have the same defining characteristics, backstory, and often the same role in the story, and the same endings. One of these characters, Arlecchino, or Harlequin, was a mask. A character wearing a mask that could not be separated from them, and therefore the characteristics of the mask necessarily became the characteristics of the one wearing it. Here's a quote directly from the Wikipedia page. He is typically cast as the servant of an innamorato or vecchio, much to the detriment of the plans of his master. Harlequin often had a love interest in the person of Colombina, and his lust for her was only superseded by his desire for food and fear of his master. Occasionally, Harlequin would pursue the innamorata, though rarely with success. This character archetype and all of its flaws were written for a purpose: comedy. And yet, the actual experience of someone who might share similarities to a character like this could easily be portrayed as tragic. Working as a servant to one who holds all power over them, being overcome with love for another but being unsuccessful in forming a meaningful relationship with them, either through one's own failures or by circumstance. Being enamored with food and perhaps eating more than one should, and living in constant fear of the one that they work for. These are, if you've been reading up until this point, all things I have personally struggled with. In a sense, I was living the life of an archetypal character, of Harlequin, trying my best to keep moving forward in spite of it, pretending that I have some semblance of control while God continues to write my cosmically comedic story. So, what do I, and by extension our main character, do to escape? Embrace the hate. After all, they haven't found their satisfying ending yet. They're left in the lurch. They feel like they are fated to do the same thing over and over and over again. And maybe God let them live this time, but maybe next time he'll find it just too funny to stop it. Maybe there is a supernatural after all. And maybe it's working against them. The solution: get mad. Rage against fate. Grab life by the neck and choke it until it cooperates. Remove everything that stands in the way of achieving their goals. You are a hate machine. And in this moment, a narrative thread opens. While this album was originally intended as a continuation of the themes in 2430 and Metamortality, what it actually grew into was a prequel. Those two albums exist because I was in this very same place, feeling lost and hopeless and angry, and examining my feelings and processing them through those songs. By mirroring the narrative journey in this album with my own experience, I like to think that I am sending this character off on their own similar journey. That they will embrace the hate and pull themselves onto their feet, only to find that there is much more to life than anger, that they will then wrestle with the same things I wrestled with in Zero, Set for Failure, Dreams Dispelled, etc., etc., all the way through until their very own mind break. And then, maybe, they will get the satisfying ending they were hoping for, after finally processing their hurt, coming to terms with their trauma, and moving on, as I did. Part of me originally intended these 3 albums to be a trilogy, and they are, in many ways. My idea was that they would represent past, present, and future. And while narratively, Willpower now comes first, it is still a look into an imaginary future, perhaps for a version of myself that may have existed were it not for the people I have been blessed to have in my life. Ultimately, it represents a cycle where future is past and past is present and present is future and everything in between. While the songs of 2430 no longer describe my life, there will come a time where they once again do. Same for metamortality. And same for willpower. Did you find the secret message in the opening track, by the way? But while life itself is full of cycles and things do repeat themselves, we still exist in time, and time still marches forwards. With the ticking of the clock, the end of this story looms closer. In most stories, when the hero meets their end, we are often presented with bombast and triumph. A heavenly chorus as they ascend to the next life, trumpets ringing out with every step on the golden path to the great gates in the clouds. But I wanted to show another reality. Time is running out, the darkness beckons, and we know the end is coming. It has to come eventually. But it comes when you're not expecting it. The music stops abruptly, without a satisfying conclusion. There are no choruses or trumpets, only the noise of a needle dragging along a blank record until there is no more length in the groove. And then silence. Make of that what you will. I'm afraid that's all there is. So this last section here is the postscript that was included in the document. It says, if you've made it this far, thank you for reading. This has been an intensely personal and difficult album for me, which is part of why it took so long. I've got a few things on my plate to take care of right now, but I'm already writing the next album and it's going to be loud and fast. I'm also workshopping a thrash metal album with some friends of mine, so keep an eye out for that. My plan is to continue making whatever the hell I find interesting and authentic, and I do hope you'll join me for the ride. I'd like to once again express my gratitude to my wife, without whom none of this would be happening, and to C, R, and E, who have been there for me through the darkest days. And lastly, to my father, Bill, who loved me more than life itself. Love you all. Stay safe out there. This was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. This was a lot more emotional than I thought it was going to be. If you're still listening at this point, I hope you got something out of it. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing okay. Yeah. Willpower. 2 years. It feels like a lifetime ago. It feels like a different reality. I try to think back sometimes when I'm listening to the songs on Willpower and remind myself how they came to be and where I was. And so often I kind of just draw a blank. There really is something to the idea that when you write a song about something authentic and personal to you, it stops being a part of you because, you know, it feels like you're taking it out of yourself, and well, it feels like to me, I should say, like I'm taking it out of myself and putting it somewhere else. And then I don't have to hold on to it. So it's a very therapeutic experience for me anyway. I'm sure at least someone feels the same way. So yeah, all of these things that I was writing about, I mean, it was good to write about them. It helped me. It helped me process my grief. It helped me process my mental illness. It's a very important album to me. And I know it is to my sister and to Jackson and to Isaac as well. It's the first time we were all part of the process. Up until Willpower, it was just me. And since then, you know, we've come out with an EP, Stereo Psychic 1, which I'm so proud of. I think it's the best thing we've done. And we've got other stuff in the works. We're just taking a bit of a break right now because we're still rebuilding our new jam space. We're moving into an empty room in Jackson's basement, and it was not finished. So we've been framing and insulating, drywalling. At the time of recording, we're in the process of taping and mudding. I say we, but it's Jackson and his dad who are doing it because it's evidently not a 5-person job to tape and mud a room of that size. Hopefully we'll get that room up and running, and then we'll get back into rehearsing and playing some shows. Yeah. Sometimes I struggle with this idea that the things that I make don't mean anything. It's that nihilism thing, right? Where, you know, what does it matter what you make? If you're just going to die, if the world's going to end, if... But I think willpower is something that I can reliably point to and go, okay, this means something. This meant something. This was about something important. And it's not our most popular work. Obviously, it's not the style that we're leaning into. But I know that Vanishing Act has struck a chord with people. I know that it has affected people. I know that the album has affected people. And I'm honored that that's the case. So I just want to say to everyone who's listened, to everyone who's reached out, to everyone who hasn't reached out, but may have still been affected by it, to everyone who's going through their own journey right now, thank you. Thank you so much. All the best. Love you all.